All right, awesome. Well, hello everyone. Welcome again to our third general meeting of our fall 2021 quarter. Next slide, please. As I said before, I want to give a warm welcome to our newest cohort of HAND members. Everyone went through a nice process of writing an application as well as doing an interview. And it took us a lot of time to do deliberations as well. So you'll be getting to know your committees and committee directors in a short bit. But I just want to say again, welcome to our HAND family club. We hope you enjoy your stay. Next slide, please. Okay, again, welcome to our newest cohort. Please join your respective Slack channels if not already. Your directors should have added you into your respective channels. And I'll be posting recaps after all the GMs where you can find the link to our presentation, the recording, and other things that we will be talking about. For meetings, GMs will be held on Zoom Wednesdays 5 to 6 p.m. For your committee meetings, they'll either be held in person or online, just depending on what type of work you'll be doing that week. And general attendance policies, we have 2 excused absences and 1 unexcused for both general meetings and committee meetings in total. Excuse is just letting your directors know at least 24 hours in advance. And you can go ahead and log your hours on our website using that address. Again, it'll be linked in a recap for any work you do for HAND. And lastly, follow us on Instagram if not already. Max posted a very nice graphic today, so go ahead and show the graphic some love. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so we're gonna do our classic icebreaker here. Again, a lot of us are new members here today, so it'll be nice to get to know each other. There's some more people coming in, but we have our name, year, major. Suppose you could change your name. What would you change it to and why? And an odd one, if a turtle doesn't have a shell, is it naked or homeless? I don't know who came up with that one, but we'll roll with it. If someone would like to post these questions in the chat as I make the breakout rooms, great. Awesome, thank you, Ellen. Okay, let's go ahead and do 9 breakout rooms. Also, if anyone wants to be a group representative and share any fun responses, feel free to do so. But let me open them up. Alrighty, we'll see you back here in around 3 minutes. All right, I hope this is a good chance to meet your fellow HAND members and maybe a fellow committee member. So let's move on to this week's seminar.
Awesome. I hope you guys can hear me because I was having some audio issues. But today's seminar is going to be on neurotransmitters because last week we learned about like neuroscience in general and like the nervous system and the neurons and how they work. And then today we'll be going into a little bit more detail on neurotransmitters and how they work and how they control like different neurodegenerative diseases. I cannot say that word, but next slide, please. And just a quick little recap from last week, we talked about like what is neuroscience. So we gave like a quick overview. It's about it's a study of the nervous system. So that includes like the spinal cord, the brain, nerves, and neurons. And it's basically studying the biological basis behind lots of different processes like memory, perception. And we also talked about how interdisciplinary neurosciences, so it incorporates a lot of like technology, mathematical modeling, definitely a lot of biology and psychology. So that's why a lot of people are interested in neuroscience because it combines a bunch of different sciences into one. And then we went over the nervous system. So we talked about how the nervous system is made up of, like I mentioned, the spinal cord, the nerves, the brain, and the neurons, and how there's two different parts of the nervous system. there is the peripheral, and there's the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and then the peripheral, which is basically all the other nerves. And we have the nervous system controls both involuntary and voluntary processes. And then finally, we gave a quick overview of the neuron, which is they're basically the main functioning units of the nervous system. So they control a lot of our behavior, and they transmit information to other cells through the neurotransmitters and through chemical impulses, which we'll be talking about in more detail today.
I'm muted, sorry. So yeah, neurotransmitters are our body's chemical messengers, and they transmit signals from nerve cells to target cells. So usually they're just like little packets, and then they go to receptors on the other side of the synaptic cleft, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. And they come in forms of small amine molecules, amino acids, and neuropeptides. And they're really, really important. They regulate vital body functions like heart rate, breathing, sleep cycles, and a lot of times they'll influence your mood and how you live your life. So they're really, really important, and we'll talk more specifically about them in the following slides.
All right, so moving on to different types of activity that they control. The brain utilizes neurotransmitters to regulate many necessary functions in the body, such as heart rate, breathing, sleep cycles, digestion, etc. In many cases, neurotransmitters carry out various functions depending on the type of receptor they are attached to. Some well-known examples of neurotransmitters and their functions are acetylcholine, which triggers muscle contractions and plays an important role in brain function and memory. Next, we have dopamine, which is important for memory, learning behavior, and movement coordination. Fun fact, because the brain releases dopamine during pleasurable activities, it's become known as the pleasure or reward neurotransmitter. And last but not least, there are endorphins, which inhibit pain signals in the body. In other words, they're the body's natural pain relievers.
Yeah, and so just expanding on this, and so when we're talking about the structure of neurotransmitters, typically they're pretty small molecules, although they can get a bit larger when you're talking about peptides, but they're generally small so that they can cross the synaptic cleft and bind to the receptors on the other neuron. And so here are just some of the classifications of the structures that neurotransmitters can take. And so one of the more common ones is the amino acid. And so some examples of this include glutamate, Gaba, and glycine. There are also monoamines, in which you have the neurotransmitters dopamine, noradrenaline, serotonin, and more. There's also the peptides, which are more longer chains. And so some examples are opioids and endorphins. And then finally, you have the other class of neurotransmitters that can't really fit into either of the other categories. And so acetylcholine is one of them. I mean, even ATP, adenosine triphosphate, has been shown to have neurotransmitter-like effects.
And so
And
now
I will just be going into a little bit more detail about like the different types of neurotransmitters and how they function and what kinds of things in the body do they control. So the first type of neurotransmitters are excitatory neurons, hence the GIF is not playing right now, but it was the guy that's really excited. And basically, in simple terms, excitatory neurons, they have excitatory effects on the activity of the neuron. So they will basically increase the likelihood that a neuron will fire an action potential. And what an action potential is you have like, you have these messages traveling throughout the neuron, like from the dendrites through the axon terminal and out the other end. So when it gets to the other side, if it'll fire an action potential. So basically, these excitatory neurons, they will increase the likelihood that you have that action potential being fired, and then thus allowing for this message to be traveled and sending out these chemical impulses. So some examples of excitatory neurons include epinephrine, norepinephrine, and also glutamate, which we'll be going into more detail with later on in this presentation. If you look at this diagram towards the right, you can see that glutamate is one of the excitatory neurons that we have in our body. And basically what it does is if you have this threshold of excitation reached, like you have a certain amount of glutamate, it'll open up this sodium ion channel in the body, which will basically allow for sodium to be passed through across the cell membrane. So if you like taken biology or any type of like physiology class, you probably learned about like the sodium ion channels. So neurons, a lot of neurons like control that behavior and what kind of like biological molecules will like pass through the cell membrane.
Yeah, and so opposite to the excitatory neurotransmitters are inhibitory neurotransmitters. So they have negative effects on the neuron, and the function is to prevent action potentials and decrease the chances of a target cell taking action. So for example, if an excitatory neurotransmitter was keeping someone awake, an inhibitory neurotransmitter would inhibit that and change that state to sleep. And some of the major inhibitory transmitters include Gaba, which is the one that most people will talk about when they talk about inhibitory neurotransmitters, serotonin, and dopamine. Dopamine can act as both excitatory and inhibitory depending on the system.
So neuromodulators are basically a subset of neurotransmitters that indirectly enhance the excitatory or inhibitory responses of receptors. The main difference between neuromodulators and normal neurotransmitters is that neurotransmitters directly produce a short and fast effect on single targets, whereas neuromodulators indirectly affect a group of targets through the use of second messengers. The effects of neuromodulators are also longer lasting than those of neurotransmitters due to targeting the G protein neuroreceptors. A couple examples of some neuromodulators are dopamine and noradrenaline. Please note that these neuromodulators can also serve as regular neurotransmitters. Neuromodulation is typically used as a therapeutic treatment for managing chronic pain of the arms, legs, neck, and back after spine surgery. Neurohormones are pretty much hormones produced by neuroendocrine cells that are released into the bloodstream. The four types of neurohormones are releasing hormones, neurohypophyseal hormones, and adrenal medullary hormones, and enteric neurohormones. Neurohypophyseal hormones and releasing hormones are produced in the hypothalamus, while adrenal medullary neurohormones are secreted from the adrenal medulla, and enteric neurohormones are produced in the gastric glands of the stomach lining.
I also wanted to add that we're gonna have like a quiz wizard at the end, so pay attention in the slides just so you can do good at the quiz, on the quiz. So now we're gonna be going into more like specific neurotransmitters that actually affect the types of, or the different types of diseases that we have that we'll be talking about later on in our presentations in the quarter. So one of the main ones that you probably heard of is dopamine. And basically what dopamine is it's a type of neurotransmitter that mediates pleasure in the brain and body. So when you think of dopamine, you probably think of like the happiness chemical. And what it does is it's produced by dopaminergic neurons, and it also plays a function in like regulating your memory, your sleep, and also your mood. So if you have a lot of dopamine being produced, it indicates like, oh, you're probably in a happy mood. And in relation to like more like neuroscience and neurological disorders, dopamine plays a really big role in controlling movement. So the basal ganglia, it's a part of the brain that regulates movement, and the basal ganglia therefore depends on a certain amount of dopamine to function, and it has to function at a certain like efficiency. So and the action of the dopamine that's affected by dopamine receptors. So all of this plays a role in Parkinson's disease, because what Parkinson's is you have the death of neurons. So you have neurons that aren't communicating, you don't have that action potential going on, you don't have neurotransmitters being released or like chemical impulses being released. So as a result, that lack of dopamine then results in the body to make unnecessary movements and also like repetitive tics, but also your movement can become delayed and uncoordinated. It can also lead to tremors because obviously you don't have dopamine working at its highest efficiency.
So serotonin is a chemical nerve cell that controls a range of functions in our body, ranging from sleep to mood and behavior. It can be found throughout the body, however, it's primarily seen in the body's stomach and intestines. While in the digestive system, serotonin acts to control bowel movements, while in the brain, it is believed to regulate anxiety, happiness, and mood. Low levels of serotonin is typically considered serotonin deficiency. It's typically associated with anxiety, depressed mood, aggression, impulsive behavior, insomnia, and dementia. There's no diagnostic criteria for serotonin deficiency and is generally discussed in terms of symptoms.
So noradrenaline is like the fight or flight response neurotransmitter. Also, I think norepinephrine is also a name for it, and it's primarily involved with the sympathetic nervous system. Again, the fight or flight part of the nervous system. And some of its functions include increasing arousal and alertness, which explains why these levels will increase as you awaken, focus attention, and enhance memory. It's largely produced in the adrenal medulla, but it can be, which is, I'm pretty sure, the kidney, but it can also be synthesized in the neurons of the sympathetic nervous system. And finally, noradrenaline aside, it can also function as a hormone and circulate through the blood. So as a transmitter, it's more quick acting, but then as a hormone, it's a little bit slower and can work to increase heart rate over time, as well as blood pressure and breathing rates.
And the next type of neurotransmitter is Gaba, which is short for gamma aminobutyric acid, and it is another type of inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it basically it's responsible for stopping neurons from becoming overexcited. So as I was talking about, it's like the opposite of excitatory neurotransmitters, where it prevents activity from happening. It prevents that action potential from being fired. And it's also known as a mood modulator. And low levels of GABA are usually associated with anxiety, irritability, restlessness, and it can be balanced naturally through like consumptions of foods rich in probiotics. So basically, like it helps neurotransmitters as well as the other ones that I talked about that helps control your mood, but it's something that can be balanced naturally, which is something that I'll be mentioning later on in the presentation about how like we use the word chemical messengers, but these are things that you can like physically help produce in your body. Next one is endorphins. So endorphins you've probably heard of. They are the feel-good chemicals, and basically these are neurotransmitters that are released when we are in pain. So like when we get hurt, they basically act as like a pain reliever and happiness booster. I'm so sorry, I can't talk today. But they basically kind of like a runner's high. So after, if you guys like run or like are in track or something, right after running, we have that runner's high where like you just feel like you can't feel the pain right away. So that's because of that release of endorphins. Endorphins are released by the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, and basically you have an increase in the release of endorphins after certain activities. So it's kind of like GABA, where if you take part in certain activities like running, exercise, even eating chocolate, that can help increase endorphins. So if you're in a bad mood, you just eat some chocolate, it'll help release those endorphins, and it also can help reduce stress and anxiety.
So next we have acetylcholine, and this is an excitatory neurotransmitter synthesized from acetyl-CoA and choline. We get choline naturally from our diet, so from like meats, vegetables, and eggs, but it's a really important thing so that we can produce acetylcholine. It is responsible for triggering muscle contractions, stimulating hormones, and controlling your heartbeat. Low levels are commonly linked with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, which I didn't know before this presentation, so that's pretty interesting. and high levels lead to muscle contractions, seizures, and spasms. So as you can see, the amount of a neurotransmitter in the body has to be pretty stable in order for the body to behave as normal as possible. And lastly, I think we have glutamate, which is present in over 90% of all brain synapses. And this is also just a regular amino acid. So it's a major reason why it's so highly abundant in the brain as well as the rest of the body. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter that allows for communication between neurons in the central nervous system. It's associated with wakefulness, pain sensation, learning, and memory, as well as a ton of different other systems within the nervous system. And too much or too little glutamate has been implicated in various disorders.
And finally, every week we're trying to show you like research that's going on at UCLA and labs that you could potentially join if you're interested in joining like neuroscience research at UCLA. So this week we wanted to highlight the Modi lab. And I believe the researcher, his name is Ishan Modi, something, let me check the actual, yeah, Isvan Modi. He has a PhD in neuroscience and he actually works for the Department of Neurology at the at UCLA Health. And he studies neuronal dysregulation, which is basically like if there's like too many neurotransmitters, too little neurotransmitters, and what effect that has on the body. And he studies them specifically in stroke, head trauma, epilepsy, and many other neurodevelopmental disorders. I cannot say that word, but what his current research going on right now is studying the role of Gaba, which is one of the inhibitory neurotransmitters that we talked about today. And he's trying to better understand the process of the role that GABA plays in postpartum depression and stress-related anxiety, and also just the role of GABA in different processes in the brain. So one of his recent discoveries actually found out that a tonic form of GABA-mediated inhibition that hinders the plasticity of the brain, which is required for recovery after a stroke. So basically, some patients were like taking a tonic form of this GABA medication, and that was inhibiting plasticity of the brain. So what brain plasticity is basically like new connections are constantly being made. So if one connection dies off, the brain is able to make new connections and find other neurons to make connections with. But this GABA mediated inhibition was preventing that from happening. So that was making recovery after a stroke difficult. So now they're able to take that information and now find new therapeutic strategies for stroke recovery.
Awesome. And now we're moving on to our quiz wizard, which is low-key a Kahoot, but we do it a little different here at hand. So just give me a second to set it up and I'll be right with you guys. Talk amongst yourselves.